I am Charles Govach, your not safe for work presidential candidate, campaigning to bring a more direct democracy to you, the American people. And as a method of campaigning, I am talking about current events that interest me in hopes that you will spread the information that you see and make other people aware of my existence. Because I am sick, as I'm sure many of you are dealing with all the bullshit. So let's get into the bullshit. I like watching Jimmy Dore. He's pretty funny. And I like the way he just basically goes up to just about everything and says, excuse me, that's fucking horseshit. And one of his latest videos he put out was talking about Rachel Maddow and how she's still pushing Russiagate. You know, I find it very funny that the thing that pisses off rich people the most is the possibility of other countries having control over what people think in this country rather than themselves. More on that in a bit. But still trying to say that Russia is the problem, and not all the shit that we have to deal with, like loss of freedoms in this country, is still laughable. And speaking of meddling elections, you know, I seem to remember Trump saying something about 3 million people illegally voting in the 2016 election. I don't remember hearing anything about anybody getting arrested. I mean, voter fraud carries a sentence of up to 5 years, so that's 15 million years of jail time we're all owed, right? And consider that everybody registers to vote, it would be pretty easy to find at least one person that committed voter fraud if 3 million people voted twice. And yet, not even Fox News reported on this, because it didn't happen. And once again, I would just like to point out that if you check the 2016 election, check at the states that had cross-check operating within them, and then check which states were red states and which states were blue states, you will find a very interesting correlation. And I would be so inclined to investigate for causation. But the reality is that this shouldn't be really a surprise to any of us, because the donkey fint really, it looks at this point where the end goal is to get rid of anybody that can potentially vote that isn't rich. Meaning, people like you and I should have a say. Only the ultra-rich and those with power should have a say in anything. And that's what really things like Citizens United is for. Because as far as they're concerned, the only people that are citizens are the ultra-wealthy, and the rest of us, we are just the slaves. But still, Trump is such a bad guy. He's working for Putin. And yet he sent a bunch of Javelin missiles, anti-tank missiles, over to not Yugoslavia to fight the Russians. Now, these weapons don't seem to really be something they need so much. And correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't the Russians still using a lot of outdated tanks in order to save costs? In order to save costs? Yeah. I love how everybody in the media speaks out both sides of their mouth. But, you know, hey, America sells these weapons to other people. That means we get money, right? You know, and as Trump said the other day, we're finally putting America first. So when hasn't, at least in the last century at least, or really ever, when hasn't America been putting America first? Let's see. There's been a coup in just about every country I can think of that has been inspired by America. America's installed dictators all over the place, and then you have thumb-sucking policies like the Monroe Doctrine, which people still use. And you still have all these territories that America owns that don't get one lick of a say in what happens to them. They are under the subjugation of the federal government, of the American federal government. and they can't do shit. And believe me, some don't want to be American territories anymore, and I wouldn't be surprised if all of them didn't want to be American territories anymore. I mean, realistically, why aren't these states by now? We've owned them for so goddamn long. But yeah, you know, it's funny because I'm playing Dark Souls 2 finally, and I'm making the game safe for democracy, which means I'm going through and killing all of the spawns over and over and over again until they cease to spawn, so that I can have free run of the place without having to worry about anything. So now you know what the whole slogan, making the world safe for democracy, really means, and really meant from the get-go. Anytime a country has practiced democracy, we've gone in there, we've overthrown the government, installed a dictator, and used dictatorship to subjugate the people, kill off the people, and take all of the resources. And if it hasn't been us directly, it's been through institutions like the IMF and whatnot. But yeah, ultimately, a whole lot of horseshit. And once again, I can't really think of a country that doesn't have some kind of really pending crisis going on in it right now. You got new protests that have been squashed in Iraq, or that are trying to be squashed by the Iraqi military. Same thing in Ecuador, and of course trying to blame it on Maduro. You've got the whole situation with Venezuela, Honduras. You've got all the protests in Brazil. You've got everything that's going on in Brazil because of Bolsonaro. You have the yellow vest still going on, and all this kind of shit going on all over the world. I really can't think of a single country that isn't in some sort of crisis. Maybe like South Korea, but they're dealing with North Korea. But the majority of the world is standing up to the authoritarianism, the rich trying to subjugate everyone else, and the media doesn't want you to hear about this because they don't want you standing up for your rights that are being taken away, the freedom of speech laws that are being implemented. Like, it is now illegal in New York to call somebody a legal alien, apparently. It's become illegal in different parts of the country to misgender a person. And other ways that your freedoms are being taken away. I won't go through a whole list now. But there are people that want power. They want to control your lives. And one thing I've noticed throughout the course of my life is that you can only ever have control over your life, or you can only have control over someone else's life. You can never have both, which makes things very interesting. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the current issue with the NBA, Blizzard Activision, South Park, and China. There, I've mentioned it. I don't think I need to say really anything. But at the same time, I keep seeing ads for vacationing to Saudi Arabia through Google. Why the fuck is this something I want to see? Why the fuck is this something that Google would think I would want to see? You know, if you really think about it, China, Saudi Arabia, and Israel all have more influence and more control over your life and my life than we do. Look at how companies bow to China. I mean, the majority of movies coming out of Hollywood suck, and majority of AAA games suck, primarily because they market to the overly restrictive. And really, any restriction in general is kind of, well, I won't say any, but you get the idea. Restriction in general is kind of ludicrous. But these places don't make stuff for you and me. They make stuff for China. And at the same time, when people do try to cater to the American market or cater to a market that is unfulfilled, you will have legislation in place preventing small businesses from growing, or they'll have them being bought out, or you'll have them being squashed in one way or another, so that the rich can stay in power and maintain control over everything, even individual lives. Case in point, the Baltimore squeegee kids. A bunch of kids whose lives are not great, and who decided, we're going to go out and make some money by offering people to squeegee their windows, something you don't see really anywhere anymore, at least I don't, and they're using it as a way to make money and help support their families. But unfortunately, all the rich people are getting together and saying, we don't like this because people are making money outside of our control. And of course, they're not saying that directly, but I will read between the lines for you. And some better news, as you may or may not be aware, I am a disabled veteran. My body is a car wreck. And I hear about things that I get a newsletter from the VA. So one thing that the VA decided to do that I actually found was interesting and should laud and praise is apparently it was called the Games to Grunts program. And I don't know why it's not called the Games for Grunts, but whatever. So anyways, the whole idea is that for veterans, especially disabled ones, that developers have made available free copies of video games, and even some notable titles like Tekken 7 and Soul Calibur 6. That's the latest one? I don't know, I stopped playing after 2. For free to veterans. Under the idea that gaming can be very therapeutic and helpful. And this is something I can personally attest to. I've had a very difficult life. I've had a lot of fucked up shit happen to me over my life. And I also had learning struggles growing up. And if it weren't for video games, I don't think I would have been able to cope with the things that I went through. And I don't think I would have been able to overcome my learning hindrances. Because the one thing that video games do that society doesn't do is provide stability. A video game is a set of rules, and even board games, there are a set of rules and instructions and mechanics, and something that is dependable and reliable on. Well, at least it used to be. Nowadays you can't tell because every company has an EULA, or likes to have a EULA and say, fuck you, we'll change it how we want, when we want it. And because of DRM, you have to maintain the latest version. Which is why I'm going through my backlog. But yeah, gaming is very therapeutic, and given the whole situation that I went through a few years ago with the psychosis and the delusions, gaming has been a way for me to recover and come back to reality. In a different set of news, something worth talking about is the current Supreme Court not yet decision, and it has to do with LGBT rights in the workplace. Now, the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, refers to employment discrimination. However, the text says that people are not allowed, or employers are not allowed to discriminate based on, let me make sure I get it right, religion, color, sex, country of origin, and one other I can't remember. It's pretty fucking obvious, I'm sure. Now, what it doesn't say is ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation, or political ideology, really. So, currently the Supreme Court is split on this, with Gorsuch, well, last I checked, Supreme Court is split on this, with Gorsuch being the undecided, and I can see why. there's always a dispute between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. There are people that want to follow the law to the letter, and there are people that want to follow the law based on its intention. And sometimes that goes into the courts as well, meaning the judges. At the same time, you have to ask yourself, what is the spirit of the law in this particular case? There are those who would think that the spirit of the law thinks, okay, we're only going to allow for these things not to be discriminated against. But there are those that would think that the spirit of this particular law means that nobody should be discriminated against for anything. So when situations like this come up, the Supreme Court has to look at and try and determine what was in the minds of the people who wrote the legislation. So this is not a very easy decision for the Supreme Court. Now, that being said, you know, that's disregarding the personal biases. So, of course, the conservatives are on one side and the liberals, the judges, on the other. You know, however, ultimately, this is something that shouldn't have to be decided by the Supreme Court. Realistically, Congress should take note and fix the wording to prevent discrimination for things like gender, political ideology, so forth, etc. However, I doubt that's going to happen because of how hyper-partisan everything is and how much everybody just, you know, we're all supposed to hate each other no matter what, and hate each other based on identity, and this coming from both sides of the aisle. And I don't just mean that based on the political, but as people as well. You know, the screamers will, you know, make sure I clarify. It's just like when Zuckerberg went before Congress. Congress has no business saying that, oh, you better fix this, otherwise we're going to have to make a law telling you to fix it. Okay, this is stuff that is failures of our government. If Congress wants that something shouldn't be allowed to happen, they shouldn't go up and say, fix this, otherwise we're going to make a law. No, they should just make a fucking law. At least in an ideal situation. We all know how everything really works. But I've talked long enough. I'm going to leave it there. Enjoy the rest of your day. And like I said, please get the word out if you want a more direct democracy for your American government, because, well, what else have we all got to lose, right? I mean, that's why I'm doing this. I got nothing left to lose, so. Until next video.